Hey guys, so today in front of us we have Asetek Simsports' new Forte Load Cell pedals. Now you'll remember recently we took a detailed look at the Invicta hydraulic pedals. The Forte pedals are a step below those, so they aim to achieve a very close driving experience with all the same fundamental aspects that we looked at with the Invicta pedals, but at a much lower price point. So these are going to come in at €499 or US dollars, tax dependent, so definitely check the website to make sure that you're getting accurate information there. The Invicta pedals by comparison came in at €849 or US dollars. They obviously were a little bit cheaper while they were in the pre-order phase, but that is the price that you'll pay as of the time of making this video. Now, straight out of the box here, you can see these are pretty much exactly the same design as what we had with the Invicta pedals, with just a few little differences, obviously the load cell and the pedal pad. So we're going to be focusing in on those aspects in today's video to keep this as short and to the point as possible. So I definitely recommend checking out our Invicta pedal review, which I'll link down in the description for you guys. But let's get stuck into this today, see how the driving experience compares to the Invicta pedals, as well as a lot of the other load cell pedals which are available on the market. And by the end of today's video, you should have a good idea of whether the Forte pedals, when they reach full retail, are likely to be something that is worth your consideration. Let's get stuck into it. Now, before we get started, just a couple of quick housekeeping things. Firstly, I do need to let you know that although these are prototype units and they obviously don't carry any commercial or resale value, we do need to let you guys know that they did send these across to us free of charge to check out. So thank you very much to them for doing so. I also do need to let you know that we do have a financial relationship with Asetek Simsports in that they have been sponsoring some of our racing content. Obviously, that is kept completely separate from any review content, but it is important that you guys have the full picture there so that you understand. Now, if you want to understand more about exactly how we handle these types of relationships, there's a link down in the description below with a written article as well as a video where I went through all the details on exactly what we do and how we handle monetization here on the channel. There's also a link down in the description below to Asetek's statement on sponsorships and reviews as well. So definitely check those out if you want to know more. But the important thing here is that we're not under any obligation to say anything specific about these pedals. This is going to be purely my own impressions, my own words, and that is that. So let's get started. Okay, so I've put the Invicta pedals up on the table beside us here for a quick side-by-side comparison, and you can see there why I'm referring you back to the Invicta review for all the details on how everything besides the load cell works, simply because literally the only differences here are the pedal pads. You can see here we have sock-friendly pedal pads on the Forte pedals. You can upgrade these to the more heavy-duty style ones that you see on the Invicta pedals here, and vice versa. You can also purchase these as an upgrade or downgrade, depending on how you want to look at it, for the Invicta pedals too. Now, I did find that these were a little bit too abrasive to use with bare feet or socks. It wasn't uncomfortable for me, but I did find it wore through my socks, and I know a lot of other people that have tested these pedals said that it was just a completely no-go zone if you weren't wearing shoes or boots. So the Invictas come with the more heavy-duty pedal pads as standard, whereas the Forte pedals will come with these. You can order the opposing type if you wish to do so, depending on your preference. Literally, the only other difference between them is the load cell versus the hydraulic module that we have on the Invictas. So for all the other details on exactly how these pedals work and how they operate, all the adjustments and all those things, definitely check out the full Invicta review, but I'll quickly run you through a couple of the key fundamentals on these pedals as well. Now, just to clarify as well, the same clutch module is compatible across both sets of pedals. All we do there is just slide it in on the side, install a couple of grub screws, plug in the little connection on the bottom, and you are good to go. Now, just while we still got these both up on the table, another important point to let you guys know about here is that there will be an upgrade path available from the Forte pedals up to the Invicta pedals, and there will also be future upgrades to the Invicta pedals as well, which will add on a couple of additional features. I can't share too much detail on that just yet, but I'll definitely let you guys know as soon as I can. That's definitely something that we will be checking out. So that's a great thing to see. Not only does it keep the price a little bit lower on the Forte pedals, because it means they don't have to retool and recreate everything from scratch from the Invicta design, but it also means that that upgrade path is a lot more simple. Simply just switch out the module and you're good to go. So let's set the Invicta pedals aside for now, and let's have a look at some more details on the Forte pedals. So let's quickly run through some of the fundamental design elements here before we get stuck into the load cell specifically. First of all, let's take a look at the base plate. You can see here we've got 4 mounting holes, 1, 2, 3, and the 4th one is sitting just underneath the throttle pedal here. Now, that is a little bit tricky to get to from the side here, but what you can do is to get to it, you simply release the little clevis pin here, pop that guy out, like so, slide this up, take the whole assembly out, and then you can actually access it directly through that hole there. That is exactly the same height. So that allows you easy access to mount the pedals, only something you're likely to have to do once anyway. And you can see here just how easy that was to take apart. This also gives us our preload adjustment for our throttle here. Now, there's not a huge amount of adjustment available on the throttle. We of course do have a couple of things that we can do, so I'll run you through those quickly now. So we'll pop that back on. There we go, that is back in place and good to go. So you can see, just like we had with the Invicta pedals, a pretty much toolless design. So we've got little thumb screws here we can use to adjust our spring preload on our throttle. Now, the Invicta pedals did come with a harder spring as well. I'm not sure whether they intend to include that with the Forte pedals or not, but obviously when we look at the full retail version, I'll let you guys know. But that allows us to adjust the preload strength on the spring there, or how stiff the pedal feels initially. And then the second thumb screw here essentially works as a thread lock. So what we do is bind those two together, and that's going to stop this from moving around over time. One thing that I have found on a couple of other pedal sets that we reviewed is if you don't have a retainer or something like this to bind the threads together, then it can sort of move and adjust itself over time. Obviously that is detrimental to performance when you're driving, because muscle memory is so fundamentally important to driving. So if things are changing while you're going from lap to lap, then obviously that's going to have an impact on your consistency. Now, in terms of other adjustments, we do have an adjustment here for the maximum amount of throw. So you can see this little screw down the bottom here can be loosened or tightened. The pedal arm will make contact with the screw, and that forms our mechanical bump stop that limits the amount of travel on the pedal. So you may want to increase that a little bit from factory. I know a few people have commented that they didn't feel like it had enough throw from factory on the Invicta pedals, although I was actually quite happy with it. So there we go, we've increased that throw now. But one thing that you do just need to be aware of is that there is a couple of other contact points here. And you can see now that I've wound that all the way down, if we push the pedal down, you can see now this thumb screw here is actually making contact with the sleeve for our push rod here before it's actually making contact here. So we need to make sure not only that that is making contact first, but also that our little armature here, which houses our Hall effect sensor for the throttle input, isn't bottoming out against this and making contact with the base plate either. So we want to make sure that that is touching first. I'm just going to wind that up a little bit more. There we go. Yep, that's just touching about 1 millimeter before we're hitting. And there we go. So one thing just to mention here, and we did mention this in the Invicta pedal review as well, is that there is metal to metal contact here that can be easily alleviated by adding just a little rubber bumper on top of the screw here, just to stop that metal to metal contact. Now, the reason why they have designed it this way is so that you don't have any squish at the end of the throttle pedal. You can imagine if you have any mechanical squish there at all, if you don't have that hard bump stop, then you might not be quite reaching 100% throttle when you push the pedal down to the ground. So what you would do is, if you were adding a little rubber bumper there, you just slightly under calibrate your pedal at a little bit of dead zone at the top there, just to make sure that you are getting to 100% throttle all the time. But that is the design choice that they've made there. And then you also have the ability to adjust the pedals forward and backwards here. So as I mentioned before, there's no lateral or longitudinal movement from the base here at the pivot point. But what we can do is loosen off the little thumb screw here and then adjust our pedal angle like so. So all we need to do is just loosen it off, screw it in, and you can see that adjusts our angle, and we can go the other way as well. So we can loosen, 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 and then that will sit it further forward. So some people prefer to have their throttle and brake completely flush with each other. I personally prefer to have the throttle just offset a little bit further forward, maybe about there. And that just means that when I'm pushing down the brake, if I'm doing right foot braking and heeling and towing, when you push the brake down, you get a little bit of throw across so that the pedal paces are flush when you're already braking. Just makes heel and tow a little bit easier, but that is a personal preference thing. Now, one thing that you will notice when you look down inside here is that there is a little rubber bump stop on the pedal return. So you're not getting metal to metal contact when the pedal returns back to zero, only when you push the pedal down to 100%. And that does quieten things down significantly. That was actually one of the things that we pointed out when we looked at the prototype of the Invicta pedals. And that was something that they added based on that feedback. And we were really happy to see that, because obviously little things like that don't matter in a race car can make a big difference in the context of sim racing, where you're wanting to keep noise levels down, not wake up neighbors and people that might be sleeping next door, stop people from studying and whatnot. And if we have a quick look down at the bottom here, you can see a bearing system down at the pivot for both pedals, and there's also a spring there too, which ensures that the pedals return to their 0 point with absolutely no dead zone or slop in them whatsoever. So some other pedals that we've tested that rely purely on the spring mechanism behind the pedal to return them to 0 can have a little bit of slop in them. You can see that one is actually under adjusted at the moment, so there's a little bit of slack there, and we'll talk about that in just a moment, but it does return to 0 when I let go of it. But if we do want to get rid of that, all we need to do is just spin around this side, unlock the thread, wind our retainer in just a little bit, and you can see now that uptake is gone completely, but we'll discuss that in just a moment, the reasons why you might or might not want to have that. But obviously those springs in the base there are what allows us to have that without the pedals just sort of being completely slack when it's in its 0 position. Now we touched on it briefly before, but this is using a Hall effect sensor to detect throttle position. Same deal with the clutch as well if you are buying the clutch add-on. So what happens here is there's a little magnet sitting inside this plastic armature and a little sensor sitting underneath in the base plate. And as that magnet moves closer or further away from the little sensor in the base plate, that deflects electrons across a little metal plate, and that deflection of electrons is then amplified by the circuit inside the little housing here, and that gives us our throttle position. Now the good thing about that is that there's no moving parts or anything that's going to wear and tear over time. Again, coming back to what we were talking about before with muscle memory, anything that's wearing out or changing as you drive can create issues, and obviously the less moving parts we have, the better in that regard. Now there's nothing fundamentally wrong with potentiometers as we see in a lot of pedals, and many high-end pedals do in fact use automotive grade potentiometers, but some of the cheaper potentiometers that we see in say Logitech pedals or the original Fanatec CSL Elite pedals, for example, those do have a more open design, which is sort of, I guess, conducive to taking on dirt and debris, moisture as well, and that can cause them to wear out and become a little bit less reliable over time. So one more thing to cover before we move on to the load cell specifically, just in terms of lateral adjustment. Now I know one thing that a few people have been concerned about is the lack of lateral adjustment here. So we can't move the base plate from side to side, or can't move the pedals closer or further away from each other laterally. So what we can do, and I just want to quickly show you this, is move the pedal faces themselves. So I'll quickly loosen these off for you so we can have a look in here, and you'll see there is a little bit of adjustment available inside here. So we'll remove both of these screws, and we can see in here there are 3 sets of holes. Those centers are offset by 8mm. So that means you can adjust your pedal faces 8mm out or in from the center line. Obviously, if you were to adjust your brake in and your throttle in as well, then that would give you 16mm closer spacing between the 2 pedals. We also have 15mm offset between the holes on the face here as well. So this gives us the option of raising the pedal face by 15mm, or if we're in the upper position, dropping it down by 15mm. Now just grabbing the Invicta pedals again here to show you these more aggressive pedal faces. So you can see here, these actually do have additional holes to the left and right as well. Those have 15mm centers. So if you're wanting to offset the pedal faces even more than that, you can do so. It's going to involve either drilling additional holes in these faces or moving across to the Invicta style more aggressive pedal pads. But yeah, you do have that option available should you wish to use it. So let's focus in now and take a more detailed look at the MLC-PC, or mechanical load cell powered cylinder as they're calling it. Now the most important thing to point out here before we get started is that the pedals that we've looked at, all the parts of the pedals that we've looked at up until this point, have all been final production, whereas this part, the MLC-PC, is all pre-production. Now there's a couple of important things to point out here. Most of these are cosmetic only, but there is one thing that will have a small impact on the driving experience. So let's start off at the back here. You can see there is some plastic here, 3D printed plastic. That serves no functional purpose other than just protecting the load cell, which is sitting inside there. That, I believe, will be either an injection molded plastic similar to what we have on the shroud around the electronics, or a piece of cast aluminum. Not sure which yet, but it won't be 3D printed. This bell housing here, which we'll look at in detail in just a second, that's a CNC machined piece at the moment. And you can see there are some CNC machining marks and some sanding marks on there. That will be cast aluminum, same as the base plate and everything else as well, so that I'll have a smoother finish on it. Cable management will be improved here too, and I'm told that they will be using a slimmer plug here too, just to reduce the amount of clutter. But most importantly, you can see on the back of this little orange ring here, there's a little Teflon spacer. That will be replaced with a thin little piece of rubber, and there's a very good reason for that, which we'll explain in just a moment. But what I wanted to do here is sort of start off by explaining exactly how this works. So the easiest way to explain this would be to give you a bit of an exploded view here. So let's pop the clevis pin out quickly, exactly the same as we did with the throttle earlier. And what we can do here is pretty much just deconstruct the entire thing. So you can see that is our push rod, which goes down. There's a little spring in there as well, which retains some tension between the shaft and the load cell, which we'll see in just a moment. And then inside here as well, if I can get it out, probably have to use the shaft to fish this out. There we go. That is our little elastomer insert. So this is essentially just a spring, or an elastomer spring. Now they tell me they haven't decided whether they're going to include just one or a small selection of springs, but what they have told me is that there will be an upgrade kit available for both the Forte and Invicta pedals, which will come with a selection of 5 different elastomer springs of different tensions to suit different driving styles. So you'll be able to purchase that as an upgrade kit, very similar to the Fanatic tuning kit for the V3 pedals, which we'll be having a look at in just a second too. So a couple of different tensions there. These haven't been finalized yet, so we're not going to talk too much about that. But essentially what this is just a hollow piece of elastomer, and as you push the pedal down, this compresses and that creates the mechanical resistance against the pedal. Now in terms of the load cell itself, as we said before, there's a little spring in here which retains some tension on the load cell at all times so that it's not just sort of slopping around in there and everything doesn't become loose. And then what happens is as you push the pedal, the push rod will slide into the unit. And if we look down inside the housing here, you can actually see a little tiny part of the load cell exposed in there. So the way this works is as the shaft pushes down on that little part of the load cell there, it's basically like a metal plate with a little tab in the middle. So you can imagine it's kind of shaped like that. It's attached here. And as there's pressure put on that little tab, it actually measures the amount of deflection in that tab. And that is what's translated as braking force inside your game. Now, the thing that is quite unique about this, and you're probably already seeing the similarities to the Invicta pedals, is we'll pop this back together quickly. Get it all back together there. There we go. That's all good. So I'll just pop this pin in as well so we can see. There we go. So what I'll do is I'll just back this retainer off a little bit now so we can see a little bit of movement. There we go. So as we push the pedal down, you can imagine that elastomer is squishing up inside this housing. And what that does is it stops the elastomer from being able to squish up beyond its maximum tolerance. So you can imagine if this is inside here, it's squishing up, it's not going to be able to balloon out any further than what this housing allows it to do. So very similar to the Invicta design in that regard, but there are some very important differences between this and the Invicta. And we'll explore the ballooning effect on these elastomers a little bit later on because I want to compare to some other designs with some other load cell pedals. So we'll explore that in more detail in just a moment. But what I want to do now is compare this design directly against a cylinder which I have over here. And this is a prototype cylinder from the Invicta pedals. Now you can see very similar design here. Obviously one of the important things being that the load cell is facing forwards on this, whereas the cylinder on this one is facing backwards, and that makes it nice and easy to replace those elastomers while you're sitting in your rig. You don't have to take the pedals off or pull things apart other than just releasing that clevis pin and popping the new elastomer in as we showed before. So you can see how this would literally just drop in the same position here and connect up in exactly the same manner. Now, the important thing here to understand is that even though you can see it looks very similar in its design here with this kind of bell housing here, which does exactly the same thing, restricts the amount of movement in that elastomer, the way this functions is fundamentally different from what we have with the load cell. So as we explained before with the load cell, essentially what you're doing is still measuring deflection in a piece of metal. So even though it is measuring the amount of force that's being exerted on the pedal and then how that's translating into the deflection of that piece of metal, it is still fundamentally measuring deflection rather than pressure. And that is the important point of difference here. If we take the Invicta cylinder by comparison here, what we've got is a master cylinder in the bottom half here. And as you push the pedal down, this compresses. And what I can actually do is pop it on this piece of foam here. And we can see if I back that off a little bit, as we push that down, that is compressing in. So we're compressing the hydraulic fluid within the master side of this contraption. And then what that does is it compresses and pushes the slave cylinder inwards. So you can imagine the pressure comes out of the back, or it's coming out here, and then it's pushing on a piston style kind of design inside the slave. And then that forces the slave to compress inwards. So let me just quickly demonstrate that a little bit more clearly for you. I'm just going to take the back of this off entirely so we can see a little bit more movement here. So we'll just screw this off. There we go. So we'll take the elastomer out and I'm just going to put this guy back on here for reference. So what we're going to be looking at is how I push in the master side and you'll see the slave side retract. So I push down and you can see in and out that goes. And you'll notice there, even without the spring, there's enough hydraulic pressure in there that it actually pushes the master all the way back out to its zero position. Now, what's really important to understand here is that because we're compressing hydraulic fluid, you'll notice the position of the sensor here. We're not actually measuring the movement in the back side of here at all. All we're measuring is the hydraulic pressure inside the cylinder itself. Now, that is completely different from the way this functions, because you can imagine as we push the pedal down, we're actually measuring the amount of deflection in the load cell. And what that means let's set that aside again for a moment, is if we do reach the maximum amount of deflection available here, if this collar is actually pushing against the housing here, then there's no more movement available, so it's not actually going to have an impact on what the load cell is measuring. So you'll remember when we reviewed the Invicta pedals, we talked about the two-stage braking system, and what that meant was when you push the pedal in to the point where there's no more available movement in the slave cylinder, you actually got metal-to-metal contact between the bump stop, as it's called, and the housing here, and you couldn't physically push the pedal in any further. But because you're still compressing the fluid, you can imagine, because the slave is maxed out, any more pressure that you put in on the pedal is just compressing that fluid inside even more, because you're trying to put more pressure on the slave, you're trying to pull the slave in further, but that fluid has nowhere to go, so all it can do is compress. And because we're using a pressure sensor here, not a load cell, we're actually able to measure that additional pressure. Now, with the load cell, it's completely different, because you can imagine as you push that pedal in, once you get metal-to-metal contact on the housing here, any additional pressure that you're putting on that pedal is going to be between the collar here and the face of the load cell here. And that's the reason for that little Teflon spacer here. And that's the reason why they're going to be replacing that in the final production unit. Now, you'll notice when we go for a drive in just a moment, this was one thing that I tested out quickly before we filmed this part of the video, just to make sure, is that when I'm driving, I don't actually max that out. So I'm not actually taking up the maximum amount of throw there. But essentially what that's doing is it's mimicking the two-stage system that we have on the Invicta system, but doing it in that tiny little bit of flex that we'll have in the final production rubber piece there. So you can imagine there'll be a millimeter or two of movement in that piece of rubber, and that is enough to simulate that second stage like what we have here, where we're compressing the fluid, but obviously it will have limitations in how it's able to convey that. Now again, when you see the driving section in just a moment, you'll notice that we never actually reach that phase with my braking pressure. I normally exert about sort of 70, 80 kilograms of force on pedals. These pedals are good for up to 180 kilograms of force though. So the experience there will vary depending on your braking style. What I would suggest generally is don't be explosive with your braking inputs. You don't want to be sort of, forcing the brake pedal down so hard that you don't have any finesse in what you're doing. So, 80 kilograms or so, I think for most people is going to be pretty good. And at that kind of force, we weren't maxing this out and entering that second stage. But I just wanted to make sure that it was very clear the differences between how the load cell system works and how the hydraulic system works, even though they fundamentally look kind of similar with this bell housing design. Now, for those of you who have watched the Invicta pedal review, one of the things we talked about there was the ability to simulate the initial uptake between the pad and the rotor in a real car. What I mean by that is there's always a little bit of a gap between the pad and the rotor to make sure that there's no drag on the disc or any friction being generated when you're driving and not on the brakes. So as you push the pedal down initially, you take up that little bit of distance between the pad and the rotor, and then once the pad actually starts to make contact with the brake rotor, that's where you actually start to get some braking. That's where you start to get some real sort of feeling in your pedal. Now with the Invicta pedal, what we were able to do is back off the cylinder here a little bit. So I'm just going to slot that elastomer back in there quickly just to give you a visual representation of this as well. So we'll wind this off quickly. So for the standard two-stage braking system, being first stage compressing the pad onto the rotor and doing your initial braking, and then the second phase being where you've got mechanical contact here and everything is just about the hydraulic pressure inside the cylinder as you push harder and modulate around. What you can do is add essentially a third phase. So you wind this back a little bit, and what it allows us to do is simulate that little bit of pad uptake there. And you can adjust this simply by winding the collar in and out. So you can see, even though there's a little bit of slack there, because we have hydraulic pressure inside the system, as we push that down, it does feel quite soft. And you'll see this later on when we get the pedals up on the rig. But it's nice and easy to push up until the point where the pad is making contact with the rotor, and then you enter your first phase of braking. Now with the Forte pedals, we can do something similar, but remember again, we don't have that mechanical resistance that's provided by the hydraulic pressure. So you would have noticed that little tiny spring that we saw inside the load cell just before. That is part of what's responsible for achieving this, along with the spring that we have here in the pivot point as well. So if we wind our collar out a little bit. At the moment, we've got no preload, but the elastomer is just engaged, so it is making contact with the elastomer. And you can see there's absolutely no slack in that pedal whatsoever. If we back that collar off just a little bit there, and remember this is adjustable just purely by adjusting the gap, what we have now is that little bit of movement there to simulate that uptake. And it's going to be really interesting to see how that feels in comparison with the hydraulic system, keeping in mind again that we're relying purely on spring pressure here rather than hydraulic resistance. So to just quickly summarize again, what we have is a push rod which goes through to a load cell in the bottom of the pedal. Essentially, when you're pushing on the pedal, you're putting pressure on that load cell, which deflects that little bit of metal. That is measured as braking force inside your game. You then have an elastomer spring inside this housing here, which compresses up, and that provides that mechanical resistance inside the pedal. The bow housing also reduces the amount of flex available to that elastomer, making sure that it doesn't deflect beyond its maximum tolerance. And that is how the load cell on the Forte pedals works. If you have a look at it, it's actually most similar to the Fanatic V3 pedals in its design. So if we have a look at the load cell that we have on these, again, you can see we do actually have the damper kit installed on these. But if we have a look at the load cell itself, you can see again, you can actually see the load cell in the back of this pedal. So as we push down, that's that little metal plate in there that's deflecting. And what's happening is we've got an elastomer inside here, exactly the same as this, and then it's got a shroud or a sleeve around it, which is actually inside, and that limits the maximum amount of squish that we have available in here. Now, by default, the Fanatec V3 pedals have a couple of things which are different from what we see in front of us here. So by default, they don't come with the damper kit. Don't actually recommend you buy that damper kit. I don't really feel like it adds any value, and it is very expensive for what it is. Some people do like to add it on their throttle pedal because it adds a little bit more hydraulic resistance there, but I actually found it added a little bit of lag to the throttle pedal. So I don't really recommend it there either, but that's a personal preference thing. We're digressing a little bit here anyway. But the load cell itself comes with polyurethane foam or PU foam inserts, and those are fundamentally a lot more squishy than what we get with the elastomer inserts that we've been looking at for these pedals. Now, Fanatec do also sell a similar V3 brake performance kit, which is something that I say is absolutely essential for the V3 pedals. It costs around about $50 Australian, I think, or 20, 30 euro or US dollars. Check on their website. But yeah, it costs a little bit extra on top of the cost of the pedals, but this is a game changer for these pedals. Now, if we have a look at those just quickly, you can see these are much thinner. There's a couple of different options here between green and red being the stiffer, and those are 12 millimeters thick. There's also a 13 millimeter thick option there too. And you can see these are solid. They're not hollow like the elastomers that we have for the Forte pedals. Now, the reason for that is that in the V3 pedals, the push rod actually pushes up against the surface, so the only contact between the load cell and the pedal surface itself is between those elastomers. Whereas with the Forte pedals, you can see those are actually hollow. So we have that shaft or that push rod going all the way through to the load cell, and these are just responsible for providing that mechanical resistance against the pedal. So a fundamental difference in the design there, although they are essentially achieving a very similar thing in their construction. Now, I did promise to show you a couple of other comparisons here as well with the design of some other pedals. So let me just quickly get those up on the table and we'll run through that as well. So up on the table in front of me now, I have the BJ Sim Racing load cell pedal and the Mecha Cup 1 load cell pedal. So again, these are achieving a similar kind of thing, although you can see the design is a little bit different here. So we've got load cell down here, and the deflection is actually taking place across the surface of this load cell down the bottom, and exactly the same in the Mecha Cup 1s. You can see the load cell down here, and that actually gives you a good illustration here. So what happens is this part is actually deflecting compared to this part, and the deflection between the two halves is what's being interpreted as braking force inside the gate. Now, with the BJ load cell pedal, what happens is you can see here by this design, there's no way of limiting the amount of deflection which happens through these elastomers. So basically what can happen is the harder you push, the more those are going to just balloon and balloon and balloon to the point where they just break. And we have been through quite a number of elastomers on both the load cell and the hydraulic version of this pedal. And that employs a very similar design to this, just with the addition of a hydraulic master and slave to create the connection between the pedal and the elastomers rather than just pushing directly on them like what we have here with the load cell version. So we did have a lot of reliability issues with this design specifically. Now, Husingveld use a very similar design to this with their Sprint and Ultimate pedals. Now, we did have a few reliability issues with the very early Ultimate pedals which we had. I bought those secondhand and they were a number of years old when I had them, and I did have a few elastomer failures on those. So far, at least the Ultimate Plus pedals, which we reviewed about 6 months ago now, have been very reliable. Tom's actually been running them on his rig right from the point where I took them off to start running the Invicta pedals, and we've had absolutely zero reliability issues or consistency issues at all. So they seem to have gotten around that problem simply by just using a higher quality polyurethane. Now, another pedal to have a quick look at here as well is the Mecha Cup 1 load cell. And again, fundamentally exactly the same design here, but what they've employed is quite a clever little design here using aluminium cups And what that does is as you squish the pedal down, those cups actually start to push together, and that essentially limits the amount of travel available to those elastomers. And we haven't had any reliability issues at all with the elastomers on the Mecha Cup 1 pedals. We ran these for about 3 or 4 months on my rig before switching across to the HE Ultimates. And these did prove to be very reliable. So a couple of different takes on the same kind of principle and what they're trying to achieve, but I just thought I'd quickly show you those just to give you an idea of how different companies go about achieving the same thing. But again, just to highlight here, what's happening is that elastomer is squishing down, but as it hits the outside of that bell housing, it restricts the amount of movement that's available, and that stops it from blowing out and wearing out over time. And so far with our experience with the Invicta pedals, which use a very similar design, we haven't had any reliability issues whatsoever. So I think that is pretty much everything to cover in terms of the hardware for now, at least. Obviously we'll go into more detail when we get our hands on the full retail, but let's get these hooked up on the PC now. We'll take you quickly through the software and then get into the driving experience. Okay, so pedals are up on the rig now. What I've done is mount the Invicta and the Forte pedals side by side so we can do a direct side by side comparison between the two, talk about all the little nuances and characteristics between both. But what I wanted to do first is just very quickly run you through the software package. Now, it's exactly the same as it was for the Invicta full review that we did just recently, so I'm not going to go into the same level of detail again. If you want to see more detail than we're covering here, go and check that video out. I'll put a link in the description with the exact timestamp to that part of the video so you don't miss anything. So software-wise, very simple design here. We've got a couple of slots here for additional hardware, which Asetek will be adding to their ecosystem later on. So wheels, wheelbases, and whatnot. There's going to be a full list over time. So very excited to see what they bring to the table later on. Then we've got tabs here for showroom, which is basically just a little display that shows you what's happening with the pedals. No actual useful technical, functionality there, but cool to see. We've got a tab for calibration here, pretty standard kind of calibration here with a, a wizard that runs through. So we've got calibrate, we push the pedal to the top, we release it to the bottom, we go complete. We've got adjustments here for our dead zone at the top and our dead zone at the bottom. So if you have a habit of slightly resting your foot on the throttle pedal, you might want to add a little bit of dead zone at the bottom. Remember, as we discussed before with the little rubber bump stop on the maximum throw, should you wish to add one of those to remove the metal to metal contact, you would need to add a little bit more dead zone here. I usually like to have 1 or 2% dead zone at the top just to make absolutely sure that I'm always hitting 100% throttle. So you can see if I push that down, then I'm reaching 100% throttle before I've actually pushed the pedal down to 100% deflection, but I'm gonna set that back to about 2% as it was. So onto the brake now. This is gonna be a more arbitrary thing. So we're gonna hit calibrate and we're gonna push the pedal to the maximum amount of force that we're comfortable putting in. So you don't wanna be pushing so hard that you're bouncing up in your chair and really having to force yourself. You wanna still have a bit of feeling behind there. So this is gonna purely depend on how strong you are and what kind of car you're driving as well. So for me, that ends up usually being around sort of 70 or 80 kilograms of force. I'm going to push it to about there. That's my threshold point. And if I wanted to modulate around that a little bit more, I push a little bit harder. So about there is good for me. I'm going to release it again and hit complete. And then you can see when I hit my threshold point, I should be hitting about 80% braking pressure. So let's just test that out. 78. 84, so yeah, somewhere around there. Now I'm cheating a little bit because I'm looking at the numbers while I'm doing it, but ideally once you've got your muscle memory set, you should be able to hit your threshold point very consistently. And what I mean by threshold point, again, just to reiterate, is the point where you feel a bit of a transition in the pedal, so you can always hit that point consistently and then modulate your braking pressure around that as necessary. And that is the key to driving quickly and consistently, at least in terms of braking. So that is calibration. Pedal maps are available as well, so you can set non-linear curves for your throttle and brake. That can be useful for driving more underpowered or overpowered cars where you want to be a little bit more easy on the throttle, or maybe you just want to get the throttle down as quickly as is humanly possible. And then for the brake, say you're driving a car that has a really sensitive brake and you don't want it to be quite so touchy around the maximum amount of braking force before you lock up, you might want to set a curve like this guy so that you get a little bit more, I guess, leniency around that stage there. So you can see there, mechanically, I'm not moving the pedal or adding much more force to the pedal, but the amount of actual pressure that I'm seeing in the game is only varying between 70 and 90% there, as opposed to 60 to 90% for the same amount of movement. So that's, you know, just a quick rundown on exactly what that does. But again, we went into more detail on that on the full review. But for me, typically I don't make use of those, but I know plenty of people that do. So it's great that that is included. And then we also have LEDs as well. So we have a full color spectrum here, as well as brightness control. You can choose any color you want. And I believe they will be implementing some additional features here with regards to how you can integrate the LEDs into the sim itself. So flag LEDs and whatnot. I'm not sure exactly what they have planned there just yet, but yeah, we'll check that out once that becomes available in the software later on down the track. Now, one thing that's really important to note here is that all these changes that we're making are actually being flashed to a little EEPROM or a little chip inside the pedals themselves. And what that means is that the calibration and all these settings follow the pedals wherever you go or wherever you plug them in. Now, what that means is that you don't have to set individual calibrations for all your different sim titles. Even iRacing, for example, all we need to do when we get into iRacing is just push the pedal to 100%, release it again. And because that calibration is actually coming from the signal that's coming out of the pedals themselves and into the PC rather than being manipulated on the PC, means that that calibration sticks across everything. And that's something that I definitely don't think should be understated, because when it comes to consistency, obviously you want to have your calibration, you know, always being the same. If you have to go in and recalibrate your brake pedal for any reason, you're never going to be able to get it exactly the same unless you copy and paste numbers and values. And you know, anything that changes the way the pedal operates is going to ruin your muscle memory, and you're going to be learning over again. So that is something that I think is really important to highlight. We see the same thing on Husing Velt pedals these days as well with their smart control module, and really great to see that here as well. But let's move on now from software and talk about our mechanical impressions of the pedals. Okay, so on to the all-important feeling of these pedals. Now, we'll quickly touch on the throttle before we move on, but again, we have discussed that in a lot more detail in our Invicta review. Obviously, the pedals are absolutely identical when it comes to the throttle, and of course the clutch module, because that is exactly the same regardless of which set of pedals you are buying. So throttle pedal, look, honestly, there's nothing particularly remarkable about it. It doesn't have a huge amount of adjustability available, as we mentioned before, but it feels nice and smooth. There's no binding, there's no problem there whatsoever. One thing I will mention is that the smooth pedal pad does slide really nicely underfoot there. You can see as I push the pedal down, it's sliding and my ankle's not moving. What I did find with the Invicta pedals, again, remembering that you can swap out these pads, so you can buy the smooth faces for the Invicta pedals should you wish to, but you can see here when I push down with socks on, my foot is actually gripping onto that. It's not sliding underneath it. So what happens is my foot kind of comes up with the pedal as I push it down, whereas here you can see that's sliding really nicely underneath. So these pedal faces really aren't sock friendly. But look, honestly, the pedal's nice and smooth. It does exactly what it needs to do. It has a nice quiet return. There is a bit of a clunk there when you hit maximum deflection, but again, we've mentioned that before. You can add that little rubber bump stop that isn't included, but you can go and purchase something if you wish to do so. But the return, nice and quiet. But yeah, there's absolutely no binding there at all. Very, very smooth throughout the entire transition. And again, it feels exactly the same as it does on the Invicta pedal. So on to the star of the show now, the brake pedal. And what I wanted to do here is I figured the best way we could possibly do a side-by-side comparison was to literally do a side-by-side comparison here. So push on the load cell, and it's interesting, I do still feel a little bit of texture there. And one of the things that I've always noticed with load cell pedals compared to hydraulic pedals is that you tend to just feel like you're pushing up against a piece of rubber, because that's, you know, literally what you're doing, as opposed to having a, you know, a hydraulic connection. But this load cell does actually still have a little bit of texture there as we push in right to the maximum. Now, it does feel like it's loosening up a little bit the more I press it. The first few times I pressed it back when we were doing calibration, when we first got it on the rig, it did feel like it was, you know, a little bit more texture behind it. And I think that what that is as that elastomer is squishing up inside the pedal, it's actually gripping on the sides of the bell housing a little bit and just kind of, you know, jumping in little tiny steps. Now, it doesn't feel like it's binding. Like, it certainly doesn't take away from the, you know, the smoothness of applying the pedal, but it kind of gives you that little bit of mechanical texture, which I actually really like in the pedal. But the more I press it, the more that is disappearing, and it is starting to feel more like just pushing up a block. So it'll be interesting to see, once we've gone for our driving test in just a minute, whether that feeling is still there. But if we compare to the Invicta pedal, just pushing them side by side, the feeling of progression and progressiveness as we push the pedal down is very similar. I mean, you can see there for yourselves, the travel is very similar across both of them. And the amount of resistance and force that I'm feeling is very, very similar. Now I've got both of these pedals set up as 2-stage at the moment, so I don't have that little bit of initial uptake in the pedal, and I'll dial that out in just a moment and create that uptake as well, just so we can see how that compares. But as a 2-stage, so just having the initial phase, and then when we reach the bump stop, it does feel very, very similar. You feel the slight hydraulic feeling of the pedal going in and out. You can actually hear it as well. You guys won't be able to hear it on camera, but you can hear the fluid actually going through the valves, and you just feel that ever so slight texture, and it is a very small thing, but it does give you that authentic hydraulic feeling that you just don't get with the load cell. But when it comes to actual modulation and input, I really, there's very, 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 minimal difference between the two. And I really don't think that there's anything on the hydraulic pedal that's missing from the load cell pedal that would make you quicker or more consistent. It's purely just down to that feeling and that immersion of that, hydraulic texture, rather than anything that's actually going to be useful to driving more quickly and consistently. But let's take all the preload off both pedals now to simulate that little bit of uptake between the pad and rotor and see where the differences lie there, because I think that's probably where the majority of difference is going to be between the two. So I've taken the preload off the elastomers in both pedals now, adjusted to the same degree, so there's the same amount of travel in both of them. And you can see when I tap on the load cell, it's not pure slack. You can see when I let go, it does bounce back to the 0 position because of that spring in the pivot point, but it does feel, almost to the point of sloppiness, I would say. So, the uptake doesn't have any definition in it whatsoever. You're purely just pushing up against a very, very light spring there. Whereas with the hydraulic pedal, you do feel the sensation of hydraulic pressure building up. Now, it's only very slight. It certainly isn't a massive difference, but that is something that I do feel I would miss if I ran the load cell set up this way. Now, I've been experimenting with the Invicta pedals for a number of months now, and I usually like to have a tiny, tiny, tiny little bit of uptake there. I don't want to call it slack. I do want to call it uptake, because it is important that you have some texture there just to give you a sensation of what you're doing. So I'd say that is the area where there's probably the biggest difference between the two. You can see even just if I tap my foot up against that pedal, you can see it's not moving freely like it is with this one. So that is definitely, and even if I test with my right foot or test with my left foot, the same. Yeah, it definitely has a lot less definition in the load cell. So that is one area where I don't think that I would ever want to run the load cell backed off with no preload like that, because it just does feel sloppy underfoot, whereas the hydraulic pedal, I can run that quite comfortably and it feels more intentional, I guess. But anyway, let me just quickly throw my boots on as well. Let's see how they feel with boots on. That's how I normally drive. And then we'll get in and do some driving tests. So boots on now, and I'd say what this does for me at least is because of the reduction in sensation that you're getting through the bottom of your foot, it actually makes the pedals feel more similar to each other than they did with just socks on, which I kind of expected, to be honest. But I mean, obviously that little bit of slack there in the pedal remains the same, so we won't talk about that anymore. But just the feeling of pushing pressure onto the pedal feels extremely similar between the two now. Try with the same foot as well. You get that slight sensation of hydraulic feeling on the pedal return. That's where it's probably most defined. But I mean, there really is very, very, very little difference between the two. And again, the difference that I am feeling here is just purely in the sensation of connection, rather than anything that I think is actually going to be useful to driving quickly and consistently. And I think that's probably the best way to summarize the differences, at least until we've gone for a drive. And look, it really is as simple as that. You get a little bit more definition, a little bit more texture in the hydraulic pedal, and the load cell pedal does feel more like you're just pushing up against a rubber block, because that's what you're doing. But yeah, they feel very, very, very similar to each other in the real world with boots on, more so than they did with just socks on. So let's jump in now, do some driving. Now, normally those of you who have watched our pedal reviews in the past would know we normally jump in the Porsche 911 Cup car around Imola. Now, I'm not going to do that in today's video, simply because these pedals do feel so similar to the Invicta pedals in the real world driving scenario, at least, that I just didn't really see any benefit to doing that. So what I'm going to do is talk you through what I'm feeling for a lap or so here on an outlap around the around Spa in the 488 Evo in iRacing. Now, this is the same car that we set our lap record, or at least my personal best time, around this circuit when we did the Invicta pedal review a couple of months back. Now, there has been a couple of build updates in iRacing since then, so it's not complete apples and apples, but it's the closest we're going to get. And the time that I had then was a 2:16.645. It's still sitting there in my all-time best lap. I haven't actually done this track and car combination since then. So it'll be really interesting to see whether I can get anywhere close to it. Exact same conditions, same car setup and everything. But let's first of all head out and let's just talk about what I'm feeling through the pedals. Now again, the throttle pedal is just, you know, it's a throttle pedal. It's really pretty unremarkable. There's nothing particularly special about it at all. It's nice and smooth. It does what it needs to do. It's easy to modulate and there's a good amount of spring resistance there. But what we're really focusing in on for this video is the brake pedal. So our first big braking zone is going to be at the end of the straight here, end of Camel Straight, and I'm just going to brake in my normal spot as I normally would do, and let's see if we can hit the apex. So right at the start of the ripples, no problem at all. That feels very familiar. So partial throttle, modulate our throttle a little bit coming round, back on the throttle again, and braking at the ripple again, getting it turned in, try to hug the apex, use all the circuit on the exit, out wide, cut in tight, try not to lose the back end, cold tires a little bit. But yeah, look, honestly, it just feels familiar. Like, I mean, I've been driving with the Invicta pedals for 3 or 4 months now, and as suspected, everything that I need to feel in terms of driving quickly, consistently, is all just the same. So you do lack that slight sensation of hydraulic connection and mechanical feel, but it's not anything that I think, you know, and again, this is just my opinion, it's not anything that is conducive to driving quickly or consistently. I'm feeling everything that I need to feel, and the difference is so small that I wouldn't say it's negligible. If you pay attention to it, you definitely can feel the difference, but I certainly wouldn't say that I'm disadvantaged running these pedals compared to the Invicta pedals. And compared to other high-end load cell pedals, I've got to say that cost a lot more than this. Hydraulic Ultimate Plus, for example, these feel every bit as good as those do. I mean, obviously we don't have quite the same level of adjustability as we have with some others. And one of the pedal sets that I am really excited to test out very soon, I was actually hoping we'd have them in time that I could sort of include some comparisons in this video, is the Hydraulic Sprints. We will be getting those in very soon, so I'll definitely include those in a comparison once we get to the full retail version. But yeah, I'm feeling everything that I need to feel here. I'm able to modulate my braking very comfortably. I'm not feeling any binding or any sort of weird sensation at all that's going to ruin my muscle memory. And I'd say I'm using the exact same muscle memory that I developed on the Invictas here on the Forte pedals, and it's applying pretty much like for like. So no issues at all hitting my apexes. Now I'm a little slower, and I'd say that's just down to not having driven this car for a long time. When I did that other video, I'd just come out of a week of doing this car and track combination, so I'd done hundreds of laps the week before, and I haven't driven this car and track combination for a good number of months now. So I'd say that the being slower would be attributed to that rather than the pedals. The muscle memory is exactly the same. Okay, so I did a bunch of laps, you did a bunch of laps as well. Neither of us actually got anywhere near our PBs that we'd set with the Invicta pedals previously.
I was faster than you though.
You were. You had to.
Maybe, I don't know. I can't remember.
You had an off track though. You had an off track.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the point is, what was the point?
I don't know.
The point was that we were both a little bit slower with these pedals than we had been when we reviewed the Invicta pedals previously, but quite a few things had changed. There's been a couple of updates to iRacing since then. We also both had been doing lap after lap after lap back then when we did the Invicta review, so it wasn't really a fair test. So what we did was we chucked the Invicta pedals back on after testing these, and our lap times for both of us were pretty much exactly the same with these as they were with the Invictas. So Tom, you've been driving with the, what have you been using the Hydraulic Ultimates primarily for the last...
Ultimate Plus for the last couple of months now.
It'll have to be something like that. Yeah, you've used the Invicta pedals a couple of times in there as well.
Yeah, well, when I'm here, I use them. At my place every now and then as well.
Cool.
Try things out, and I mean, going on to these, it's remarkable how similar they are to the Invictas.
Yeah.
I think when you're racing, you've got boots on, especially. It's the differences are quite subtle.
Yeah, and I think it's always, with any sort of endeavor, like that last few percent is where the money is. So like you're right into mountain biking, and it's the same kind of thing. Like to get that,
it's a rabbit hole if ever.
Yeah, and it's always been the same with performance cars as well. Like you can tune an engine on stock internals to a certain point.
Yep.
But to get that last 5% headroom, you've got to spend thousands and thousands of dollars to unlock it, and it's no different here. So I think really the main overarching impression that I have, and feel free to disagree with me, is that the Invictas do give you that little bit more in the brake. They give you a little bit more feeling, a little bit more, I guess, connection to the car. But for me, at least, it wasn't in a way that I felt was beneficial to consistency or speed. It was more just that last little bit of immersion.
It's just pretty cool.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's like, oh yeah, that feels authentic. Whereas with the load cell, it still does have that kind of feeling of pushing up against a rubber block, which you are. So.
And the fact that, our brain has gone straight to comparing these to the Invictas, which are so much more expensive.
That's right, yeah.
But we should be comparing these to things, like what should we be comparing
Well, I mean,
to
really,
price-wise?
I think probably the thing that people are going to compare these to mostly is and I've got a couple of notes here. So Hydraulic Sprints are €618 plus €91 for the base plate. This has a base plate integrated into it.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, the Sprints have, and we haven't tested them personally yet, so we do have to, not go into this in too much detail, but just at face value, at least, they do have the advantage of a little bit more adjustability in terms of the brake, a little bit more adjustability in terms of the throttle potentially as well, but again, we need to test that. You can move them from side to side as well, which I think is a big, not necessarily detractor from these, but it is something that I know a lot of people don't like about this design, the fact that you can't move them beyond just what you can do with the pedal pads. For me, I haven't found it to be an issue, but I know it definitely does bother some people. I've got pretty big feet, and I haven't found that I, get clumsy and messing into each other. But
on other pedal sets, I have scrapped the clutch and had the pedals quite far apart so that I've got sort of a straight line down my leg to the brake pedal and the throttle, and I quite like being able to do that. But you get used to it. It's not a big deal, but it is something that's not. You can't do it with these. It is a thing. It's
definitely something that needs to be pointed out. But yeah, look, I mean, these come in at, $499, including VAT in Euro, and $499 plus sales tax in the US. That is significantly cheaper than even the Sprints are.
Yeah. How much are the Ultimates?
The Ultimates are, they're around €1,000 from memory. We'll flash it up on the screen.
Yeah, okay.
But they're significantly more expensive than these are. They do have hydraulic dampeners on all three of the pedals.
Yeah, see, because I don't want to compare these to anything less than the Ultimates, I don't think, because they really are at that level of quality and enjoyment.
Yeah, I think without the adjustability, the adjustability aside, and ability to move things side by side, I think that really is, in my mind, that's probably the closest comparison. And I was perfectly happy running the Ultimates until I had the Invictas on the rig. I actually swapped out other hydraulic pedals that I'd been testing. As I said in the Invicta review, one of the things that impressed me about those pedals so much was the fact that they have been reliable. And every other set of hydraulic pedals that I've ever had on the rig, and there must be 6 or 7 sets now, have all had, either a complete failure or some sort of leaking or something that kind of makes you think you don't really want to have that sitting on carpet, or, you don't want to be relying on it for a really important race or something. Because I have had them fail right before a league race and things like that. So, having that reliability in the Invictus has been great. But yeah, I mean, like you said, you really are comparing these directly to pedals which cost twice as much.
Exactly.
Which is pretty amazing.
Incredible, yeah.
Yeah. So
especially you consider the complete package with the software, which is really good software as well. If you're looking at some of the other load cell pedals like the Mecha Cup ones, they just you just be running DI view for those.
Yeah. I think they do have software now. I think it came out a little bit after we did the review.
Okay.
But I might be mistaken there.
I'll check that out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you know, it's definitely something that we're starting to see more of.
Yeah.
But and also when you consider the overarching ecosystem as well, once they release their wheelbase and other things that they're planning, you know, this will integrate nicely with that as well. So that also is an advantage. The ability obviously to save the calibration to the EEPROM on the pedals, same deal as what we have with the smart control from Husingveld, but that is, you know, something that I think shouldn't be understated. But
I mentioned it with the Invicta review as well. The software is just really high quality. Like when it comes down to even just that showroom animation, which serves no purpose.
It's just
super smooth. It looks like a really well written bit of software.
Yeah,
it just runs so well.
It oozes quality throughout, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, look, for these, I think the few little things that I will nitpick about them, and again, remembering that this is, you know, prototype phase and things will change, I would like to see some sort of additional, maybe polyurethane spring or something like that included to give you that same clutch. Sorry, I said clutch. What am I saying clutch for?
I don't know.
That same pad to rotor uptake that we have with the Invictus. To give you an example of that, let me just grab the CSL Elite pedals. So if we look at the back of those, you can see it's got that little polyurethane foam spring there, and what we can do is when we push down on that, make sure it's in the shot there. Yep, we're good.
You can focus on it a bit better as
well. Focus on it too. There you go. So when we push down on that, it does give you that little bit more feeling in the resistance. What I found with this, when we did have it dialed out and disengaged, or you know, no preload, even though you do have the return spring at the pivot point, it does underneath your foot, at least, you know, especially with boots on, it feels pretty loose.
It's a bit floppy,
It feels pretty floppy. So I don't think that spring provides quite enough tension to really give you the same quality of feeling that you get in the Invicta pedals, because you've got that hydraulic resistance.
Yeah.
So I think if they gave you maybe like a centimeter or, you know, 5 mil thick polyurethane spring similar to this, that you could put in there if you did want to have that dialed in.
Yeah.
I think that would be a good
maybe
inclusion.
even a stiffer spring in here might do the job. I'm not sure.
Maybe, I don't know.
Because that seems to be the same spring that they're using in the Invictas.
It is, yeah.
But obviously in the Invictas you've got the hydraulic pressure as well. So without that, maybe just a stiffer spring might do the job.
It might do the job, yeah. I don't, like, you wouldn't have the progressive.
No,
one of the things with this is, like, as you push it down, it stiffens up, and you're not going to get that with that kind of spring. So I personally, for me, like I would
be nice to
have a little insert in there. And again, like it would be an optional thing. Yeah. Maybe they'll make that part of the upgrade package that we were talking about before with the 5 different elastomers. But yeah, something like that I think would make a difference for those who do want to have that sensation.
Yeah.
But I guess really, I mean, again, remembering that we are looking at a prototype here, I guess the big question is, if these were the only pedals that I had, if I had to give back every other set of pedals that we have access to, would I be happy? And honestly, the answer is yes.
Yeah.
I'd be fine with it.
Absolutely.
There's really not all that much difference. The feeling was pretty much the same.
Yeah.
I felt I had the same level of control. Yep. You know, I could, you know, the car was communicating to me what it was doing in the same manner.
Yeah.
And really all it was just that tiny little bit of hydraulic feeling that, yeah.
I think if you're not utilizing that uptake there, then you may not even notice that the pedals have been switched. With boots on, I would struggle to tell. Then if you get told, then you'll be like, oh yeah, okay.
Yeah,
I can, you know, there isn't that hydraulic texture there, but it is so subtle.
Yeah, it really is. You know, I would say that these are at least 90%.
Oh, at least,
that's good.
Yeah.
At least. It's going to be somewhere between 90 and 95%, I would say.
Yep.
So look, I'd say that, you know, if you have bought Invicta pedals, then you will absolutely be happy with them. I'd say, you know, if you want to have the best of the best and you can afford it, then that's great.
Yeah.
But you're certainly not getting a significantly inferior experience with the Forte pedals. I think that they're, you know, for the price point, you know, I think honestly, I think it is a bit of a slap in the face to the industry. I think, you know, a lot of other manufacturers are going to have to stand up and take note, because, you know, these are very, very, very good for the price.
Absolutely.
And, you know, we've reviewed a lot of pedals that I would not choose over these, that cost a lot more than double what these cost.
Yep. So the Phonetic V3s that we've got over here,
Yep.
they are $399.
Yep.
Plus the performance kit, which we recommend.
Yep, definitely. I think that's a no-brainer. If you're spending that money on the pedals, you absolutely should get the performance
So what's
kit.
that, about $420-ish thereabouts?
€420-ish
for a 3-pedal set.
For a 3-pedal set.
Yeah.
So adding the clutch on this, will add significantly more.
So it is getting into a bit of another level in terms of cost, but the quality difference between those two is enormous, in my opinion.
Yeah, that you get so much more feeling of what's going on with the car through this than you do with the V3 pedals. I'd say the throttle is probably same. It's not a huge amount of difference there. Yeah. But just again, it's down to that difference between, the V3 pedals are more of a kind of hybrid thing where you kind of, even though they are quite stiff, and a lot of people actually complain when they first install the performance kit, myself included. It's just so different from what you're used to coming from, something like a Logitech pedal set. That, you have to completely reset how you drive, and you are purely relying on pressure rather than, position. Whereas, something like that with the performance kit, you're kind of doing a bit of a hybrid thing where it's more position, more pressure, but still a little bit of position. Whereas the travel is so small that you really are just purely focused on your pressure. But yeah, these definitely to me are a big jump up from the V3 pedals. Again, it will depend on the kind of driving that you're doing, and some people might just prefer to have a longer throw in their pedal. I mean, I would have said 6 months ago that I prefer a longer pedal stroke, and it wasn't until I was forced to not have that with the Invicta pedals that I kind of reset.
Yeah, you realised the benefits of it.
I realised the benefit of it, and it did genuinely improve my lap times and consistency. And now I any pedal set that I test, I do set it up stiffer than I used to. So, being forced into a corner with the Invicta pedals actually ended up being a good thing for me. But again, like whatever is going to suit you is...
Yeah, well, I mean, with the Ultimates, the HE Ultimates that I've got at the moment, I have them a little bit softer than this, just to give me a bit more, I guess, diversity of cars that it's well suited to. So running around in an MX-5 or something like that, it just feels a bit more natural and right to me to have it a bit softer.
But I guess what it boils down to there is that same design philosophy of, they're making these feel like a real life race car, and I guess without compromise. One thing they did mention that I've got written on my notes here is there is an extended travel kit coming for the Invicta pedals. I assume that they'll have something similar for this as well, so that's something that'll be really interesting to that'll be very interesting to check out.
Yeah, okay.
So I've said a couple of times now that I prefer these to a lot of the other load cell pedals that we've tested, which cost a lot more. So I guess I should probably elaborate on what it is about these that actually makes me feel that way. So I think really what it boils down to is just that really cleanly defined threshold point. So when you push the pedal down, you do get that really, obvious point where it starts to sort of stiffen up, and then you can modulate your pressure around that. And it's exactly the same as what we said about the Invicta pedals and why we like those. With a lot of other pedals, you get a more progressive feel in the pedal, so it's harder to sort of sense, okay, yep, that's my maximum braking point. We've had a couple of other pedals that we've tested as well where there's been like a mechanical click or something with the mechas. Remember the two little metal plates would click together, and you'd hear that, and that would kind of be like, oh yeah, that's where that's your cue. So whereas with these, because the travel is so short, you really, you push it down, you feel the pressure there, and you're like, yep, that's my point. And you can just modulate around that so cleanly. So that's really what it boils down to for me, and it's exactly the same as it was with the Invictas. It's not down to, the type of feeling that you're getting through it. It's not down to, texture or, lack of binding or smoothness or anything like that. It's purely just down to, the sensation that you get of the threshold point. Yeah, I mean, I guess... It's a bit of an awkward one, isn't it? Because they really are almost as good as the Invicta pedals, and they cost a lot less. So yeah, for now at least, I think that's really all we can say. It'd be interesting to get our hands on the full retail version and see what that's like. But for now, really impressed.
Yeah, and I'm really keen to look at the Heusinkveld sprints as well to see how they stack up against that. So make sure you're subscribed if you're not, so you don't miss out on that. We'll get that out as soon as we can.
Yeah, I was hoping that we would have those here in time for this video, but unfortunately that wasn't to be. But we should have them here in the next week or so. So we'll definitely get onto those, and we will absolutely have had some experience with those, if not have a review out on those before we have a look at the retail version of these too. So we'll be able to include that into the mix. So hopefully this video has helped you out. If it has, leave a thumbs up. And yeah, if you do decide you want to pick up a set of these pedals, pre-orders will be live by the time you're seeing this video. So there'll be a link down in the description below for that. So check that out as well. And yeah, guys, hopefully that is everything you need to know to decide whether, at least for a prototype, this is a product that you're going to be interested in. So we'll be back soon with the full review of the retail version. But for now, that's it. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you soon. Bye.
See ya.